Righto, Robbie. I'll get it right this time.
Got it all wrong. Good point.
By the way, Mr. Chair.
You are certainly right, Mr. Catter. Just give your name and position, mate.
Rob Catter, member for Mount Isa.
Do you have an opening statement?
Yeah, I do. I'm surprised that I'm still surprised what we've heard here today, but we've had a multinational business that's come in here, doing what they should do, trying to make a profit, promoting their interests with some silky smooth words, and it's the tail wagging the dog. They've come in. If I'm going to bring a new business into this state, I check that I conform with the regulations. I check with the government, see if I'm right to go. If I'm not, I'd lobby my local member. I'd try and get the rules and regulations changed to accommodate my business. Then I'm off and away. I find it terribly offensive that we have a business here that's completely disregarded the fact, even if it hasn't gone to a court of law, it hasn't been tested in a court of law, but I'm confident that if it was, we'd find that it would confirm what we just heard from DTMR. It is unlawful, and we're sitting around twiddling our thumbs watching them break the law while they push their business and putting thousands of businesses at risk. I question what is our job here as government. What is the point of us being here? Because we've set regulatory framework for better or for worse, and like I said at the start, there's two parts to this bill. One is acknowledging that it's an unlawful activity and addressing that and policing that. The other is the philosophical debate whether they should be allowed or not. But park that aside for the moment. We've all seen that they're unlawful, and their only response to that we've heard from Uber today was, oh, it hasn't been tested in the court of law. I'd suggest that's because they're a big multinational corporate with deep pockets that are scaring everyone, and they're scaring politicians because they're trying to win over the public debate. Now, I'd like to take to issue one of the points that was made by RECQ, which was a highly narrow view, and you narrowed in very well, Mr. Chairman, in an objective manner, saying what was the point of your questionnaire. You can fill out you can ask someone objectively. I can go survey all the kids in Brisbane and say, what do you eat for breakfast? They'll say McDonald's. Is that a good outcome if we test on that survey? If you don't educate people on what are the implications, what are we talking about here with this taxi industry? Because in 10 years' time you might wake up and you don't have the same disability service, or they're chasing 90 million in tax revenue that's not there because they're not paying their taxes in Australia. There's all these other inadvertent things that this business of Uber is not talking to you about, and of course they're going to keep that away from when you quite rightly zeroed in on them and tried to press on these inadvertent things that are happening around their industry. Well, that's such a narrow view, and quite frankly, it's a lack of leadership. You don't go to the public, and I think there's a good word to use as relativism. We don't keep slipping to the lowest common denominator. One of the strong arguments there used by Uber was that hotel B&Bs are here to stay. Why? No one said that legally, if this is not tested, if we accept that this is a legal activity and we don't want it here, well, we should make that decision. The voters and the politicians should make the decision, not a market-based decision that's influenced by giving out ice creams and $45 subsidised rides and winning public opinion that way. It's undemocratic. It's not the way we're set up. And if we're going to act like that and just say, well, it's here to stay, as the RSCQ said, as Uber said, well, why are we wasting our time with these things? We make a law, and for better or for worse, they're there. And until that review comes in and we determine whether that law should be there or changed, they should respect the laws that we make in this place. And even if there's doubt, they're saying, well, it hasn't been tested in court of law, but it's highly likely it is unlawful. Well, shouldn't the responsible thing to be to say, well, we'll just park our business until we're sure that it is lawful, then we'll start to operate and compete. The other point that they make about they're not competing, it's a different type of business. Well, somewhere along the line, the common sense test has to be applied here. Why are we talking about, and quite frankly, some of the false statements I'm making, 70% hail and ride, well, it's 50% is the measured one we can confidently say. So they're the ones throwing around, these false figures at the moment. But there is a drop in the taxi market. That's why we're seeing so much attention here, and it's mimicking it's mimicking what the taxi service do, and that's the whole point. And I mean, usually the law and policymakers have to see through the silky smooth words and all these highly sophisticated arguments that make it sound really technical and realise it's the same service. They're mimicking the service that someone's make money, and we've built regulations around that. And I pulled out one of the comments they made in their submission that said that the public commentary by DTMR and the government has been speculative and it's evidence of gross protectionism. Well, where does that stop, gross protectionism? Hotel industries, we put regulations in there, and people will spend $1 million on buying a pub because they know that business is protected by the laws that enshrine that industry. And we've done that because we're confident that the government will enforce those laws and police that. And, you know, it's been said before, but for the same reason, we don't want houses up the road starting to sell booze and creating dramas. We have those laws and we police them, and it's exactly the same principle here. And bring up Airbnbs. I think that seems to be one of the foundations for their argument of why they should exist, is that we should just accept these things because they're here. That's a completely flawed, and like I said, it's relativism. It's not. We don't just re-regulate to match the desires and intentions of expanding global business idea that may or may not be good. We haven't determined that yet, whether it's in the best interests of drivers. And, you know, a little survey going out from the RACQ is not saying, well, yeah, that's final, that'll determine our position, because a lot of people said that they think it's a nice idea. I noted with great interest that Uber avoided the questions on price gouging, which had some other clever name, but no one's being made aware in these surveys, or when they're taking advantage of what might be a lower price now out there, but they're not aware of the fact that they might be facing price gouging or hikes, or cars that aren't available because it's not a 24-hour service, or that their cousin who's disabled may not get a cab because, yes, they do have disabled vehicles, but there's no obligation there. There's a 20-25% obligation which isn't subsidised, as the RACQ claimed in here. It's not subsidised. Well, they pay for that out of their own profits they're making already. And is that a bad thing? I mean, it's a community service, and that's the whole point of regulation, so that we know we've got enough disabled vehicles there to handle those things. But if we want to let these people have their way, there's no guarantee or control over that. Or if there is, after you do regulate, wait till that happens. Don't let them destroy an industry or start pulling it to pieces before they've even got permission to do it. The point, I think they were very good questions on the TMR, where I find it highly offensive. I've said it before, that a company can come in knowing they're unlawful in their activities and start blocking the phones of TMR officers trying to do their job. I just find that so highly offensive, regardless of the issue. Forget we're talking about Uber. I find it so highly offensive as we sit here as policy makers debating things, putting in policy and then we review policies if we think they need it. There's a review in place. Wait till that happens, and then you can conduct your activities. Until then, they should show the respect to the laws that we have here and not conduct their activity. And I don't think that's a big ask. They said that, did I consult with them before the bill? I'd be very interested to know if Uber consulted with the government or the taxi industry before they moved into Queensland and started bulldozing their way into the market. I think that would be an interesting question to ask. They talk about safety. I think it was interesting that they're saying that demerit points should just be related to safety. Well, that's a really interesting statement to make, because you can get 2 demerit points for failing to display clearly legible P plates, green P plates, failing to display clearly legible L plates, or failing to display clearly legible red P plates. Safety, well, there's no driver fatigue regulations in Uber at the moment. I think it's 16 hours in the taxi industry, but there's regulations there again. And yes, there might be costs from the government, because it does cost to regulate, but we benefit from those costs. That there's a community service component of taxis that we benefit from. So to just say that we should deregulate the hell out of everything, or in fact, to be kind, you might say regulate a portion to fit what they want to do. Well, you've got to measure that against the disbenefit, or what that's going to do to all the benefits we've got out of a regulated industry, and that wasn't acknowledged in any of those contributions I heard from the RACQ or Uber. There is inadvertent effects to the things that they're doing. it was raised earlier. There's been evidence out there that people are starting to even offer rides services, taxi-type services, unlike not even under the Uber banner, because they can see that the government's not enforcing the laws, and it encourages that sort of behaviour. So that's outside of Uber's control, but it's an inadvertent effect of doing nothing. So all we're saying with this bill is, if you are an unlawful activity, and the member for Dalrymple's question was spot on, if you've got nothing to worry about, and it's not going to cost the government any more money, demerit points, but it's a disincentive for them if they're breaking the law. So how they can be sitting here arguing against it on any other basis, we're not necessarily having a philosophical debate here. We're just saying there's a law. We just heard DTMR saying that it is an unlawful practice and it needs to be policed. If it's not being policed at the moment because they need more effective tools, let's give them an effective tool with demerit points. We do it for other minor things. I think this is a big thing. I find it offensive, and I think this is the least of what we should be doing to intervene here. And what I find just an offensive practice, and you know, if this is called protectionism with small business, well, so be it. But there needs to be some point where we put the national interest test on these things and say, is this better for a few consumers who might be manipulated by popular opinion, so something's new and trendy, or do we make responsible decisions as government and show leadership that is in the best long-term interest? And that hasn't been done here. This is a strong commercial push into a market that they've got a strong commercial advantage because they bypass the regulations. They don't have the same level of security. They don't have 24-hour rolling criminal checks like the taxi industry does. They get tested once every 12 months when they go for their licence. So it's nowhere near the same level of security on that basis. And there are safety issues with them. Outside of the driver fatigue, there's taxi ranks are made. We legislate, councils create taxi ranks, and there's all sorts of activities that happen around those to control the flow of traffic. But picture a world where there's 20% of the taxi industry left and the rest is Uber. You've got a whole heap of Uber cars pulling up outside Fridays here, there and everywhere. It's not controlled. So, and that's what we've got at the moment until there's any regulation around that industry. They shouldn't be operating now, and we should be doing more about policing it. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Katter. My first question was going to be with regard to comments that you may have heard here this morning, but I don't think we need to worry about that one. You've just covered that quite well. Do you have any views about whether it may be better to regulate ride sharing than to provide a further penalty for taxi service offences?
It was a bit slow on the uptake. Can you, Mr. Chair, say that again?
That's okay, mate. Do you have any views about whether it may be better to regulate ride sharing than to provide a further penalty for a taxi service offence?
Well, in the short term, definitely penalties in the short term, on the basis that I think it's offensive. You need to send a signal to any other businesses that come into our state, into our country, into our state in this case, bypass the laws, or say, well, there's a small chance we might be lawful, so let's just keep, let's not wait for permission, let's just keep operating and block their attempts to try and fine us. I think we need to send a signal to, hotel owners, pharmacy owners, people invest in businesses around Queensland that, no, we will uphold the laws that we make, and we'll take a responsible attitude to developments in a market. We'll have a look at it, we'll review it, but until then you cannot operate.
Michael.
Robbie, just pulling you back to the actual bill, because we're not going to get a result from the review till August next year, so things may change then. In the meanwhile, the department's already told us this is an unlawful ride-sharing business or taxi service. So we need to look at whether your proposals are the best way to deal with that being illegal, and maybe what sort of amendments we could make to it. Now, the Taxi Council has recommended that we look at some amendments to make sure that the Transport Operations Act is inserted into the Police Powers and Responsibilities Act, so the police will have authority to pull over people that they deemed to be breaking the law. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, good question. That adds to the integrity of the bill. That picks up on what we're trying to achieve here, which is to clamp down on people that unlawfully practice, in this business. So, if the whole point is we're trying to send a signal that if you're unlawful, we're going to come down and there'll be a result, and if
Consequence.
a consequence is the word I'm after. Thanks. So I think that adds to the bill, and fully supportive of that.
Okay. Vinny?
I was going to ask the same question.
Yeah. Glenn?
I understand, and I think you answered this a little bit before, I understand that you work with the industry stakeholders while preparing the bill. What, if any, consultation? I remember the guy said that you did give him a call, prior to the bill being introduced.
Yeah.
What consultation did you undertake with Uber and any other ride-sharing services prior to your introduction of this bill?
All right. So I took it Uber ride, and I read their submission. I think it was to the Senate, their document, and which gave recommendations to how the law should work in Queensland. I read that, and subsequently read their submission and had that discussion, and nothing new came out of that discussion. There's what Uber don't acknowledge is that there's a lot of peripheral issues to just their business. They're just saying we're just here innocently operating this business without recognising all the inadvertent effects of damage that can do, and saying, well, it's what the people want and what consumers want. And my opinion is that they're playing the politics and trying to put pressure through public. It's a new trendy thing for people to use, which puts pressure on politicians, which shows they think they can win the battle that way. And I think that's offensive. I think it needs to be transparent on what all the damage that can be done from a new business that hasn't been properly reviewed, and until that's done, they shouldn't be allowed to operate.
No worries.
No question, Michael? Okay, I might just throw this one in for Mr. Curry. Are you aware there is a disagreement over whether Uber and other ride-sharing services are operating illegally? If the bill is passed and the legality of those services is still uncertain, some may consider it unfair for Uber driver to have demerit points recorded on their traffic history. Do you have a view about that?
I just think in the broader context, I think I'm trying to think of an analogy, but if I was a bit sketchy on selling booze out of my house, I just wouldn't do it. And if someone else asked me to do it for them, stand in, I just wouldn't do it. So if you want to participate in that space, you run the risk yourself. And I think it's been made pretty clear that there's a strong risk. I believe, it's been, the Minister herself has said that it's unlawful. We've had DTMR saying it's unlawful. I think that's a pretty good signal to drivers that should throw enormous red flags to them to say they're putting themselves at risk. So it's unfortunate that they've been driven or misled to that point where they think that they're fine and they're protected, but that's not the case, and that's an unfortunate situation. I think that's been driven by the determination and speed that they've tried to ram this business model into the market without going through the proper channels that every other business has ever had to do.
No further questions?
Just on the insurance aspect, Robbie, that we talked to RACQ about, they were quite unsure whether an Uber driver may be covered by insurance.
Yeah.
Is that something that we should look at putting into this bill somehow, or doing something there?
Well, that's probably a very pertinent comment. On reflection, I find it really interesting that an organisation that has to take all the comprehensive issues of their drivers into play around Queensland would just sidelines that issue as not impacting or important. I think we've got to be a lot more responsible if you're in positions of these to acknowledge that that's a risk and that it is a problem, and surely, at least out of a sense of caution, there should be a lot more attention paid to that issue.
Well, thanks, Mr. Caddo. No more questions. I'll just make a comment before I close the hearing down. I thank everybody for their attendance here today. I know at times it gets a little bit difficult to keep respect flowing in all directions, but I thank you for your efforts in doing so. This committee is a very open committee, and we're determined to have have every opportunity to meet with interested stakeholders and including members of the public who wish to come along and hear whatever is presented and form views, and then it makes them interested in what the outcome will be with regard to the committee. And we need the cooperation of everybody to make sure that we put forward a fair and reasonable report with regard to not only this matter but a number of other matters that are impacting on across the state. So I thank you for your attention.